Environmental hazards may change resentencing for juveniles right here in Jacksonville. Tonight, we are learning about a public defender preparing to show how lead poisoning may have impacted her client's behavior. Ken Amaro is on your side, taking a look at how this could affect those who are now behind bars. Ken joins us live to explain. Ken?
That's correct, Heather. We're talking about juveniles who were younger than 18 when they were in court and were given a life sentence without parole. The Supreme Court has already said that is illegal and it's been banned. But now there's medical evidence that shows that those children, before they committed the crime, may have been exposed to environmental hazards like lead poisoning, and that lead poisoning may have contributed significantly to their criminal behavior. We all know that here in Jacksonville, there are a number of environmental hazard sites, ash sites, sites that have been on the government Superfund list. And some of those individuals have lived in those areas where their homes were exposed to these hazards. Attorney Terry Sapp says she is representing the project for juveniles who are serving life without parole from the public defender's office. And Sapp says the courts now have to consider the sociological development of the child in the resentencing phase
that the child may have had in childhood, either by virtue of living conditions, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, environmental abuse, basically. And one of the factors that is a common thread among many people who were sentenced to adult crimes as children is that they've lived in areas where there were toxic waste dumps and in particular lead.
Now, Sapp says some of the clients that you represent have confessed to her that they have lived in those areas where they were exposed to environmental hazards. And now the courts, once it resumes the resentencing hearing of these individuals who are facing life without parole, she plans to present this evidence so she can get the mercy of the court to reduce their sentence. Coming up at 6, we'll hear from a medical expert about the evidence. Back to you.